you very much. It is a real pleasure to be here and an honor for me to be leading or introducing Justice Bernstein. I thank the Justice for taking the time to come here. Thank Ali representing, to John Pinney, to many of our friends and in the community, the Cincinnati Center for the Global Practice of Law, DREAM, and the International Law Society, all of whom are co-sponsoring the event. I thank all of you for taking the time to come. This is a really important event. It's something that we're really excited about, and it dovetails so well with some of the initiatives that we've been talking about in terms of a path forward. The two primary ones I'm thinking about are inclusion and belonging. We talk a lot about inclusion and belonging, and I think the Justice in his career and in his life has helped demonstrate ways in which we can be better with respect to inclusion and belonging, in particular with respect to disability rights. Also international law. The Justice is a Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court, and yet at the same time is known around the world for being a disability rights advocate, and the manner in which some of the changes that we really seek to make here really do change the world. The name of this series that I'm honored to be kicking off here, I should have thanked Nora Burke-Wagner for helping arrange and organize this entire event. And the series that Nora is really doing the work for and then sticks me up in front to take all the credit, it's great to be a dean, by the way, is called Lawyers Change the World. And I can't imagine a better inaugural speaker for a Lawyers Change the World event than Justice Bernstein. Justice Bernstein was elected to the Michigan Supreme Court in 2015. He is the first blind justice to serve on that court. He's an elected position, as I say. And he's been a tireless disabilities rights advocate throughout his career. He graduated from the University of Michigan and then Northwestern School of Law. See Jamie over here clapping, and some of the Buckeyes want to leave. But before you leave, he also sued the University of Michigan. All right, so over the big house, right? Specifically, as they were doing the renovations to the big house, there was an inadequate attention, let's say, and I'm sure the Justice could go into far more detail. Fascinating case with respect to the types of accommodations that were made for disabilities rights. Successful in leading to a series of adjustments that were made to that stadium that serve really as a national and a global method by which stadiums can be built in a way that is far more sensitive to the interests of the disabled. That's just one example of the kinds of impact litigation that the Justice led prior to becoming a Justice. He had suits against Delta, against Detroit Metro, the ABA with respect to the LSAT, New York City with respect to Central Park. At each one of these cases, there have been changes that have led to positive results. So as I say, this really is an example of changing the world locally, nationally, and then internationally. The Justice is also very well known and has long been well known as a prominent citizen of his community. He was one of Detroit's 40 under 40, Michiganian of the Year, Board of Governors of Wayne State, and is an athlete, fellow marathoner. That's something the Justice and I share in common. He's a part of the National Jewish Sports Hall of Fame. I'm not. We're different that way. But we have both run 22. We both run. Justice has run 22 marathons. We both run a number of marathons, and the Justice has done 13 in New York, and I just qualified for my first. So he's ahead of me, but in many respects. And so it is a real honor, as I say. And please do join me in welcoming Justice Bernstein to our board.
Law school's hard. And I admire each and every one of you because you want it so badly. You want it so desperately. The reason I admire you all is because this isn't the only thing that you have to do. Many of you have families. You're working. You're simply trying to get through the day. And yet you keep pushing forward. You keep going. On those cold January, February mornings, you have kids to feed, to get off to school. You have husbands and wives that you have to take care of. You're trying to juggle so many different things. And you ask yourself the question, is this worth it? And you come here to school and you have to deal with all the academics. You ask yourself, what does all of this mean? What is the point of this? As you sit as a first year and you do your legal research and writing, you write the best memo that you could possibly write, and it comes back with red all over it. Or you write the best brief that you could write, and it comes back with red all over it. But you keep going, and you keep persevering. No matter how hard, no matter how difficult, no matter how challenging it is, you simply find that strength. You find that energy. You find that tenacity to simply keep going. And you wonder, what point of this? What's the relevance of this? Where does this all take me? What's amazing is that the law can change people's lives. You're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days. The more challenges you have, the more difficulties that you have, the more experience you have, the more you're going to be able to do something great. The more you're going to be able to impact. The more you're going to be able to affect change. The more you're going to make life better for those who exist around you. Yes, law might appear to be theoretical. And when you're reading in textbooks and doing your research and doing your writing, you might ask yourself, is this real? Does this lead to anything? Who are these people? Well, I can tell you that through the law, change can happen. Because sometimes our economic system doesn't always provide justice. Sometimes you need the courts to be involved. Sometimes you need the support of judges. Sometimes you need the support of a different branch to make certain that things can work the way that they are intended, that things can happen in ways that are beneficial, and that change can ultimately and fundamentally come in a profound and significant way that all of you have the chance to be a part of. It was my first case. I had just graduated from law school, passed the bar, and there's a story behind that. Because when I was in law school, I struggled every day to keep up. I prayed every day that I would have the strength to get through. I used to always tell people when I graduated that, well, I was very proud because I graduated in the 10th percentile. But what I leave out is it was the bottom 10th percentile. But I am sure that you have heard this from your professors and deans, that there's an old saying and an old question that is asked, what do you call the person who graduates last in their class? You call them a lawyer. Or, yes, you can call them a justice or a judge. Here's the story. When I was in school, I struggled every day to survive. I struggled every day to make it through. And I remember it was a cold night in Chicago, and I prayed to the Creator, and I said to him, if you give me the opportunity to graduate from law school and ultimately pass the bar, then I will dedicate my professional career to representing those who have disabilities and special needs who otherwise do not have access to legal representation. I will dedicate myself to those who are living in the shadows but aren't able to come into the light and aren't able to get the representation they so desperately need. Now, miraculously, after graduating from school and passing the bar, I went back to my family law firm and said, a promise is a promise. This is work that we have to do. This is work that we have to believe in. This is work that we have to make a difference with. And I remember our first case. It was people with severe disabilities, namely veterans, who weren't able to access city buses. 50% of the fleet was operating with broken wheelchair lifts. And due to such a situation, when buses would come, they weren't able to pick up these passengers. It would not be uncommon for our veteran to wait in bus shelters or to sit outside hospitals or to get stuck in transfers for hours at a time, hoping and praying that the next bus that would come would be able to pick them up. After 7 years of litigation, the system was changed. New buses were purchased. Training was taking place. Is the system perfect? No system is perfect. But is it better than it was? Can people use this system? Can they navigate this system? Can they get to work? Can they get to their jobs? Can they get to medical appointments? Can they live a decent quality of life? The answer is absolutely yes. And what was exciting about this case was it actually set the standards and guidelines for transit authorities all across the country. Here in Cincinnati, when you have those new gleaming buses that kneel when they come to a stop, one could say that that was the precedent that came out of the Detroit bus case. So you ask yourself, why are you doing all this work? Why are you studying so hard? Why are you leaving your kids during the night? Why is this so difficult that you don't have a day off? You don't have a weekend? Well, you ask yourself that question, but you come to realize that you're part of a bigger purpose. You're part of a bigger reason. You're part of something grander and greater than yourself. You're part of something extraordinary. You are part, if you continue on this road of being a part of a fraternal order that ultimately does have the power to make life better for those who truly and desperately need it. It was interesting. As a professor at the University of Michigan, they had spent $300 million to build a new stadium. But in doing so, they didn't make it accessible. The argument that they were making was under the ADA, if you repair a structure, you don't have to bring it into compliance. But if you alter it, you do. So the argument that was being put forth was that this was just a series of repairs. Scoreboards, benches, cement, bathrooms. This was just a conglomeration of repairs. But the challenge with that is that members of the United States military, who I represented, were getting injured when attempting to go to the games. The slopes were too steep. They couldn't control their wheelchairs. So as a result, they would have injuries along the way. They weren't able to use the restrooms. So men and women of the Marine Corps were soiling themselves inside stadium bathrooms that were not accessible for them to use. But after about another 5 years of litigation, the stadium was rebuilt and was made fully accessible for all people with disabilities who wanted to access it. What was also important about this was it set the guidelines for all commercial construction all across the United States. Nowadays, you see people with disabilities all across aviation. You see people in wheelchairs. You see them getting on and off airplanes. You see them traveling across the country and across the world. You don't really think much about it It just becomes a part of life. But that wasn't always the case. There used to be a time where airlines didn't want people with disabilities to be traveling. People would struggle with it. I had clients whose wheelchairs would be smashed and broken, not on purpose, but just because there wasn't any proper training. I had people that would be dropped to the ground because they didn't know how to do proper transfers. People couldn't navigate airports or parking lots or have that aviation experience come easily. So commonly what would occur was that people with disabilities would just choose to stay home. And if they flew an airline like Northwest at the time and had a horrible experience and would complain about it, the airline would literally tell them, go fly somebody else because we really don't want you. Quite candidly, it's expensive to have you. So if you're not happy with the service that you're receiving from this carrier, we're fine with that because we don't want you. Maybe not as said in such a harsh tone, but the underlying message was really there. After years of litigation, the courts held that the ADA was applicable to U.S. aviation. The ADA was applicable to commercial construction of airports, to the airline experience. This case was able to change the way that people traveled, how they traveled, the manner in which they traveled. All of that was changed and brought to being in a whole new light as a result of litigation. So nowadays, when you see people with disabilities and special needs at the airport, you might not think anything about it, but understand that every right, civil rights, for disability rights, had to be fought. Every right had to be earned. Every right had to be obtained. Now, it's interesting. After doing this work for 15 years, I decided to run for Supreme Court Justice. Now, this was going to be a challenge, to say the absolute least. The question was, what was the response of the state going to be to somebody who is blind, serving on the highest court? Are people going to be okay with that? Somebody who has a severe disability, are people going to be good with that? Is that something that people can accept? Or is that just too beyond the envelope? Is that just too hard a concept to be able to work with or understand or even begin to appreciate? And in Michigan, as in Ohio, we are elected on a statewide basis. So as I traveled from city to city and town to town, we were able to connect with people. What we found was that people were able to identify with challenge. People were able to identify with struggle. People were able to identify with hardship. People said, you know what? I'd rather have a judge that's had a hard time in life. I'd rather have a judge that knows difficulties. I'd rather have a judge that knows pain. I'd rather have a judge that knows suffering. I'd rather have a judge that nothing ever comes easy to. Because you know why? My parents are struggling. My kids are struggling. I'm struggling. So I'd rather have that person who can empathize and understand. If you want to know what makes a great lawyer or what makes a great judge, it's not necessarily what you're reading in the textbooks. It's not necessarily Vosgood v. Putney. It's not necessarily all the cases that you have to learn and all the things that you have to know. If you want to know what will make you a great leader, if you want to know what will make you a great advocate, if you want to know what will make you a great visionary, it comes down to one thing. It comes down to your life experience. It comes down to your understanding of challenge. It comes down to your relationship with other people. It comes down to your passion. It comes down to your energy. It comes down to your spirit. It comes down to your vitality. It comes down to that mission that you have sought. It comes down to that personal statement that you wrote upon your admission. It comes down to why you wanted to become a lawyer. Now, of course, you have families, you have homes, you have bills, you have things that you're responsible for. So, of course, you're going to have to find a position that's going to allow for you to live a comfortable life. Not everybody has the opportunity to go off and work in a clinic or do pro bono because you have families to feed. You have obligations that you have to uphold. But remember why you did this. You don't have to rebuild a stadium. You don't have to change aviation. You don't have to do any of that. But what would make you a great lawyer is when you're at a firm, a case comes along, or a person has a question, you're able to take an interest in it. You're able to do something about it. You're able to believe in what you're doing. You're able to believe in your client. You're able to believe that, you know what? There's a little bit of a sacrifice here. There's a little bit of a challenge here. There's a little bit of a difficulty here. There's a little bit of an inconvenience here. But this is something I believe in. And as a result, this is something I'm going to fight for. I'm going to attempt to make a difference. I'm going to attempt to make change. I'm going to attempt to do something great with my law degree, with my experience, with my understanding, with my appreciation of who I am and what I am ultimately sent here to do. I am going to use that to do something profound, meaningful, and real. You don't have to change the entire world, but if you're willing to take on a case or represent a client or do something meaningful for someone, then ultimately you are putting that experience, you are putting that knowledge to incredible use, and something great will ultimately happen and will ultimately come from it. The law provides great opportunities. You can do anything and everything that you want to do. You might want to be in a courtroom. You might want to do real estate, whatever it is that you want to do. The law will provide you an opportunity to do that. You have unlimited opportunity to do things, to experience things, to initiate things, to interact, and to do nothing less than change the world that we live in and the world that we've come to know. You know, it's interesting. You can have an impact in every way. You can have an impact as a lawyer. You can have an impact as a judge. I spoke about this a little bit last night because we ask ourselves, what is the point of this? Why do we do all of this? What's the meaning behind all of this? And when I spoke of this, I spoke about a few cases. And when we get to the end of our careers, there will always be a few cases that will ultimately define who we are. Now, remember, as a blind person, if it takes you an hour, it takes me 5 to do the same thing. So if it's an hour for you, multiply it by 5, and that's what it takes for me. It's usually a 1 to 5 ratio. We have something called conference at our court. That's where we gather every Wednesday. And we ultimately come together and we decide minimally 25 cases. Now, these cases are going to basically determine people's entire way of life. These cases are going to determine people's freedom, their independence, their environment, whether they're going to see their children again. Every aspect of life is determined and decided at conference. Every aspect of humanity is debated and discussed at conference. Every aspect of law is brought to bear at conference. And so people ask, how does a blind person do this? You put the cases into Braille? And the answer is that you can't. Because one Braille page is going to correspond, one textbook page is going to correspond to 65 Braille pages. That makes Braille insurmountable. It's simply not attainable. You can't Braille 3-week murder transcript. Then people say, well, what about dealing with the issues that arise from technology? Will technology help? Well, technology isn't going to make a difference, because if you use technology, you're not able to interact with your colleagues. And if you can't interact with your colleagues, you can't persuade. And if you can't persuade, then what's the purpose of even being there? So for a blind person, how does it work? I have to memorize all 25 cases every week. Now, I don't know them word for word because that would be literally and figuratively impossible. But you know enough about the case that when the commissioner says, justices, we are now on case 18, and case 18 is a carjacking on Woodward Avenue that resulted in 2 homicides, you're able to recall enough that you can bring that case to light. In addition to the fact that you have to learn all the common law cases that are on point. So there are cases that work in your favor that are on point, and there are cases that work against your position. You have to know all the cases that work for you, and you have to know all the cases that work against you so that you can make an argument. I always say to myself, well, it's only people's entire lives that are on the line. It is only people's entire lives that are truly at stake. There were 2 African-American men that were sentenced to life in prison. The case just didn't look right. It didn't feel right. There were all kinds of contradictions. There were all kinds of problems. So when you dig into it a little bit further, you come to find that they didn't do it. Why do you go to law school? Why do you do this work? Why does the law matter? Why is this something we care about? Well, there are 2 young men who are free today. However, still lost 18 years of their lives. So for them, nothing will ever really be the same, or could ever be the same. But you know what? At least their lives are better than they were. I'll share with you another case that I discussed last night. When we ask, why does this stuff all matter and why does it count? Why do we care? Why do we study so hard? Why do we work so hard? Where does this take us? What is the point of this? The people of Flint, Michigan were ultimately poisoned by their government. 150,000 people had their water supply poisoned. And the question was, did they have redress against the government? Was there a constitutional right for them to bring an action or for them to bring a claim against their government? Question was brought to the court. It's not so simple. It's billions of dollars. This is going to affect teachers, law enforcement, buses, water, sewage, everything you can imagine. This is going to have that impact. It's going to have that effect. That's why we have what they call the GITLA, to shield the government who serves as a sovereign. I was able to write an opinion that said, these folks matter. They have a voice. And whatever hardships this brings upon the state, They have a constitutional right to be heard, to be listened to. That's why these things matter. The Ford Rouge plant wanted to build some smokestacks. Didn't matter that there was going to be soot all across the neighborhood. Didn't matter that this soot was going to fall on schools. Didn't matter it was going to cause asthma. Didn't matter about any of that. The question was asked, does the community have a right to play a role in its own destiny? Or is it overruled? Do community members have a right to be heard? Do they have a voice in the process, and do they matter? And we wrote an opinion that said absolutely yes, that they do. I'll share with you one last case. When you ask yourself why these things matter, when you ask yourself, why do these things count? Question was asked, do local districts in the state of Michigan have the right to regulate whether firearms are brought into a school? The argument was made that this is a state issue, not a local issue. Local districts like Ann Arbor, Bloomfield Hills, Birmingham were advocating that this should be within their purview. That if they want to put forth rules that say that you can't bring a firearm into a school building, they should have the right and the power and the authority to do such a thing. Complicated case, I realize it. Passionate issues on both sides, respect it. The question was, does a person have the right to bring an AR-15 into a school? Or does the local district say, we have the right to regulate that? Now, the questions that I asked was, look, in the Upper Peninsula, where everybody knows each other, in a small town where people are comfortable with each other, the school district can say whatever they like. If you know John or Bob or Sam, and they are bringing in weapons into the school because that's what they feel comfortable doing, and they keep it on their hip and they walk around with a weapon, and everyone in the town knows them and you know them and the people are comfortable with it, then the local district can allow it. The local district in Charlevoix or Sheboygan says, look, this is something we're comfortable with. This is something we feel people have a right to. Then that's the purview of that district. But if a district says, like Detroit or Pontiac or Flint or Westland says, you know what, we're not that comfortable with that. We're bigger. We have a lot more people. Not everyone knows each other, and it's going to set off concern and fear. If people see someone walking into a classroom with an AR-15, that's going to cause some fear. So we think we should be able to regulate that. Well, in a decision of 4-3, that's how close these things get. It was determined that no, you can't force a district to have to not be able to develop its own policies. So individual districts across Michigan can develop their own individual policies as it pertains to gun use or gun bringing in a firearm into a school campus. You can make a difference as a lawyer. You can make a difference as a judge. You can make a difference as a magistrate. You can make a difference as a professor. You can make a difference every single day by just simply interacting with people and doing good things. You can make a difference by just simply coming to this lecture. You can make a difference by every aspect of who you are because you already have made a difference. You've inspired, you've excited your family and your friends and your neighbors and your community about what is possible, about what hard work means, about what sacrifice truly is, just by being a student at this school. Now I'm going to end, and then we'll take some questions. But I'm going to end with a story that I always share. It's a story that defines who I am. And it's a story that I tend to live my life by. It's the story of the angel who came upon Jacob. As we know from this story, there was a great battle. And the battle raged until the dawn. And when the sun rose, the angel blessed Jacob and gave him a new name, the name of Israel, which is translated to mean one who struggles with the Creator. But we also learn from Scripture that Jacob was not left uninjured. He was given a shattered hip. He would know great pain for the remainder of his days. I believe the Bible tells us this because it was only through Jacob's setback, it was only through his pain, it was only through his hardship, it was only through his struggle he was able to empathize and understand and relate and ultimately connect with those who he was sent to lead. And it was only through that ability he was able to become the father of people. Remember what your mission is. Remember why you're here. Remember that personal statement. Remember what it is that drives you. Remember what it is that keeps you going. Use it. Apply it. Be proud of it. It's who you are. It's your mission. It's your gift. And most importantly, it will ultimately be nothing short of your overall legacy.